Do some people in the US really live in the middle of nowhere like in horror movies? Yes. My aunt had a rule for a long time: if she saw more than 10 people in one day, she'd move farther up the mountain or somewhere more remote. She took bear spray with her on walks and once had the road to her house washed away in a landslide. Groceries were 40 minutes of driving one way. I live about 15 miles from the nearest store, gas station or city limits. People may not realize how much of the US is rural agricultural and developed. I feel safer here than I ever did living in an urban area. I lived on acreage for a couple of years and was daytime burglarized twice in 1 month. The appeal is that they can just drive up the long driveway where no one can see and take their time, I guess. After that I started working at home, and on a regular basis sketchy people would knock on the door only to be at the wrong address when I answered. I got a shotgun to add to the handgun I already had, and usually had my hand on one or the other when I leaned out the door to ask them what they wanted. But really the biggest difference was made just putting a heavy chain across the street end of the driveway and keeping it padlocked unless I was driving in or out. No more lost guys checking to see if anyone was home. I've lived atop the Rockies, no houses within many miles of pristine wilderness, and I've been middle of the hood. Yes, I lived in a town in HS that had about 2,000 people total. I went to school with lots of kids who had to drive into school 40 miles or more because they lived out on a ranch or something far away. We had to drive 2 hours to the next big town to go clothes shopping or see a movie. It's pretty common in most of America outside of cities. I think a lot of those people have guns and it's perfectly legal to shoot someone in your home. I live relatively nowhere. I'm not afraid of anyone invading my home. It would take too long to get out here and back. The most I've got to steal is some booze and a couple of laptops. Waste of time. Robberies are more easily committed in large cities where houses are nearer to each other. There are more places to escape, hide, rob, quickly pawn and launder, etc. Isn't that every country? I live early in New Zealand, and there are places in Australia that are days away from a town. Burglarizing someone in the middle of nowhere is a pretty big risk. It's usually one dirt road in and out, and there isn't really anywhere to run away to hide or blend in if you get caught. Lots of rural people know the police won't get there in time, and will be happy to defend their home themselves. Also, if someone sees you, they know you aren't supposed to be there. I can walk around the back of my neighbor's house and look for an open window, and no one would blink twice. I can walk out the back and be in the street walking along like anyone else in a few seconds. I think almost every American home in such an area has multiple firearms, mostly for hunting or protection from wildlife, but if you decide to break in, that's on you. Yep, burglaries are statistically rare. Many people like the serenity of living rural. For some, it's simply the more affordable option. Yep, born and raised in northern Canada 20 miles from town. My daughter lives in a town of under 1,000 people and the closest larger town with 5,000 people is over an hour away. Closest neighbors are over a mile away. No one is afraid of home invasions because everyone has multiple firearms and dogs. Yes, and it's not uncommon. I've lived in several places like that. I grew up on a ranch in western SD. Our nearest neighbor was 5 miles away and nearest town was 20 miles on gravel roads. Never had any safety concerns other than the wildlife rattlesnakes, occasional mountain lions, and packs of coyotes. Many live in that situation. Cities can be much more dangerous than being on your own, and most of them are armed. Last place you want to break into is the house at the end of the road. The home invaders invade in the city. They know the ones in the hills are armed. It's just this simple. Yes, absolutely. I lived in Medina County in south central Texas, west of San Antonio. It was literally a 45-minute drive to anything. I was the first kid on the bus before 6 a.m. and the last kid off usually near 5 p.m. There was literally no possible way to do simple things like go home and change after school, before a game or after a practice, before going to eat. If you went north or west, picture looking between 9 and 12 o'clock on a compass on foot from my house. It may have been days or even weeks before running into people again. We would occasionally have lost border crossers pass through, and I often wondered just got long they had been since seeing another person. We kept water jugs and drinks in an outside fridge with frozen chicken legs in the top freezer for them, and a note on the fridge: Ayudars, si mismo y vas. People foreign to the country never seem to grasp this, but the US is a giant place. The bulk of its territory is middle of nowhere like in horror movies. Lots of small towns and rural areas. And most of those people have weapons. They get used mostly when dealing with wild animals, but it's there when wild people show up too. Yep, it's actually safer out here. Yes, there are vastly rural areas here in the USA. And yes, most people living in the country, as we call it, have guns. Pistols, rifles, shotguns, and even semi-automatic rifles are very easy to get most places. There are more guns here than people. 99.999 of them just lay around, not shooting people. Home invasions are not common in rural areas, simply due to decreased population density, despite what movies show. Home invasions tend to be more prevalent in poor, high-density cities, with high crime rates and drug violence.